There's a point where pain stops being something you experience and starts becoming something you identify with. A point where the hurt becomes so deep, so personal, that it begins to shape your decisions, your relationships, your worldview, and eventually, your entire identity. And few characters represent this psychological transformation more powerfully than Sasuke Uchiha from Naruto. Because Sasuke's story is not just about revenge, it's about addiction to revenge. It's about emotional isolation. And it's about what happens when a person becomes so consumed by pain that they begin pushing away the very things that could heal them. When Sasuke was a child, his world revolved around one person, his older brother, Itachi Uchiha. Itachi wasn't just family to him. He was a role model, a symbol of strength, approval, and emotional connection. Sasuke admired him deeply, and psychologically, that bond mattered because children often build part of their identity around the people they look up to most. They seek validation from them, safety from them, meaning through them. Then, in a single night, everything shattered. The massacre of the Uchiha clan didn't just traumatize Sasuke, it destroyed the emotional foundation of his entire life. And what made it even worse was the person responsible, the same brother he loved most. Imagine the psychological conflict that creates. The mind cannot easily process love and betrayal existing in the same place. So what happens? The pain becomes obsession. This is where revenge enters Sasuke's identity. At first, revenge feels understandable, human, even justified, because psychologically, revenge gives people the illusion of control after trauma. When someone experiences extreme helplessness, the mind searches for a way to reclaim power. Revenge becomes a mental promise. One day, I'll make the pain mean something. And for Sasuke, that promise becomes everything. His training, his relationships, his emotions, all of it becomes centered around one goal: killing Itachi. But here's the dangerous part about revenge psychology. The longer you hold on to revenge, the more your identity starts revolving around the pain itself. You start living against your suffering. And this slowly begins to isolate Sasuke emotionally. At first, he still has connections. He has Team 7. Naruto Uzumaki, Sakura Haruno, and Kakashi Hatake genuinely care about him. They offer friendship, support, belonging, the very things he needs emotionally. But Sasuke rejects them more and more over time. Why? Because emotional connection becomes threatening when your identity is built on pain. This is something that happens in real life too. People who are deeply hurt often isolate themselves, not because they don't want connection, but because connection makes them vulnerable. It forces them to feel emotions they've buried under anger and ambition. And if revenge becomes your primary coping mechanism, then healing starts to feel like weakness. That's exactly what happens to Sasuke. The more pain he carries, the colder he becomes. The more isolated he becomes, the more extreme his thinking becomes. And psychologically, isolation is dangerous because it removes emotional balance. When people disconnect from healthy relationships, there's nobody left to challenge their destructive beliefs. The mind becomes an echo chamber. Pain repeats itself. Anger intensifies. Obsession grows. This is why Sasuke eventually leaves the village, not just to gain power from Orochimaru, but because revenge had become stronger than connection. He believed power mattered more than bonds. And this reveals a powerful psychological truth. Unresolved trauma often makes people sacrifice long-term fulfillment for short-term emotional control. Sasuke thinks strength alone will heal him. But it doesn't. Because trauma cannot be solved purely through power. And this is where revenge addiction becomes visible. Most people think revenge is about hatred towards someone else. But over time, revenge becomes self-consuming. It traps the person chasing it. Every thought revolves around it. And eventually, without realizing it, the person becomes emotionally dependent on the anger itself. Sasuke doesn't know who he is without revenge. That's the tragedy. Because when revenge becomes your identity, healing feels like losing yourself. And then comes the biggest psychological collapse of all, the truth about Itachi. When Sasuke discovers that Itachi massacred the clan to protect the village and spare him, his entire worldview breaks apart. Everything he believed in suddenly becomes unstable. The hatred that fueled his existence no longer has a clear target, and this creates identity chaos. Psychologically, this is what happens when someone builds their life around a belief, and then discovers that belief was incomplete or false. The mind struggles to reorganize itself. Anger searches for a new direction. Meaning collapses. And because Sasuke never emotionally processed his trauma in a healthy way, he immediately redirects the hatred elsewhere, toward the Hidden Leaf village itself. Notice the pattern. The target changes, but the emotional addiction remains. That's how revenge works. It never truly satisfies the pain underneath it. It only temporarily redirects it. This is why people consumed by resentment often remain emotionally trapped even after winning. Because revenge cannot heal grief. It cannot restore innocence. It cannot undo trauma. It only gives temporary emotional release while deepening long-term emptiness. And Sasuke's emotional isolation becomes even more severe during this phase. He cuts himself off almost completely. He sees bonds as obstacles. He believes loneliness makes him stronger. But in reality, isolation is slowly destroying his emotional stability. Now compare this to Naruto. Naruto also experienced pain, loneliness, and trauma. But Naruto moved toward connection, while Sasuke moved away from it. Naruto allowed pain to increase empathy. Sasuke allowed pain to increase detachment. And this contrast reveals one of the most important lessons in personal development. Pain does not decide your future. Your response to pain does. Sasuke's journey is what happens when suffering becomes your identity instead of your experience. Because pain is something you go through. It is not something you are supposed to become. And eventually, even Sasuke begins realizing this. Near the end of his journey, after endless fighting, isolation, and emotional exhaustion, he finally confronts the truth. Revenge has not brought him peace. Power has not filled the emptiness. Isolation has not healed the wounds. The thing he spent years running from, connection, was actually the path toward healing all along. That realization changes him. Not instantly, not perfectly, but it begins breaking the cycle. And this is the deeper message behind Sasuke Uchiha. Unhealed pain can become addictive. Emotional isolation can feel safer than vulnerability. Revenge can feel like purpose. But if you build your identity around anger, eventually the anger becomes your prison. So the lesson is not to ignore pain, it's to process it before it consumes you. To understand that strength is not emotional numbness. Real strength is facing your wounds without allowing them to define your entire existence. Because if you never heal emotionally, you will spend your life chasing external battles, while the real war continues inside you. And Sasuke's story is ultimately the story of a person learning, painfully, slowly, and imperfectly, that no amount of power can heal a heart that refuses connection. That's why his journey resonates so deeply, because beneath all the battles and abilities, it's the story of what happens when a broken person mistakes revenge for healing.